And we're back. This is a Middle Perch live on the internet. I am MTK on the MIC. It is Friday right here and Saturday in Asia and Australia and pretty much any place past Mumbai going that direction. And today we're going to talk about a couple of different things. I'm not going to say I was shaken up because it's pretty hard to shake me up, especially after the events of September 11th, which I witnessed very close to my own eyes, and I did not get emotional. I did not freak out. Instead, I observed and stared at them. And I ruminated on what I witnessed since. But that's just one example of a thing, probably the biggest and loudest, but also when I was in Palestine and when I was in New York during the election and in LA during the election of 2004. These were all times when I intersected with the sort of the big thing. And I did not freak out. Rather, I stared at it and I held my line and then was reduced instantly to a tiny single voice, or a voice among very few, and then told if you stick with it, then you're outside, because the national narrative has now moved on. And in those instances, what ends up happening is you get a guy like me stuck somewhere that nobody knows and listens to or believes, with boxes and boxes of collected material, which we would call discovery, that no one is investigating. And so what I did instead was I joined the art world and professionalized the presentation of it so it could be shown at least within the art world. So I know that artists, and in particular book artists, but certainly people who draw, people who use pencil and paper, one little element of what I've done here, which was the 9/11 material, has been shown in, venue for months at a time in 4 cities in the United States, New York included. And so I guesstimate something like, being conservative, 15,000 people were able to consume my thoughts on this matter. And then when I went to LA in 2002 to have my child and protest the reaction to the events that I had witnessed, I joined Pacifica Network to help them in 3 ways. There were 3 ways I was going to help Pacifica Network. I told them this in the interview. The first interview was on the phone, and I was talking to a speakerphone with 7 people at the table. And I was unemployed, an artist, and a journalist who had been working for George magazine in New York most recently. And I was in LA. And I was very anti-war because I couldn't believe what was happening. And I had seen so specifically what had gone on there. And so I get to this interview and I tell them, all right, here's the thing. I worked for this magazine in the middle of in the media center of this country during those fateful hours in Florida in the morning after. And I got to see amazing things happen to the democratic process at the federal level, if you will, from that vantage point. And for a person like me, raised in, Texas, and going to state schools. And, of course, I was intellectual enough to critique the things I was learning, but still, to see that manifest right in front of my face enraged me. I was an active participant in the United States until then. I voted all the time. I encouraged many to vote. I participated in politics. I helped elect someone. I managed a campaign. I didn't do it well, but still we won big. I always voted. I graduated with a degree in political science and history. I was a good citizen, excellent citizen, until the Florida fiasco and the selection of George W. Bush over Gore in that time. And I got to look at it very clearly because I had access as a journalist. So I came to Pacifica and I said, that's one. I want to run your 2004 election coverage because of what I saw in 2000, and I think they're going to try it again in 2004. I said this openly in the interviews. And I said, two, I hear you guys are going from analog to digital. It was a massive transition for that place. This is a hippies station founded on peace principles in Berkeley back in the day. And this is the LA one. And they were using, not good equipment. So someone who had been trained from analog to digital and done it many, many, many times, I could help the news department to transition to a digital environment, right? I was cool with that. And three, I was going to give their station an intellectual spine that it never had. And I can say this about both. Well, I can't say it about KPFA as much. It had it. There were times when KPFA did have it in my life. But as a listener to the network for, say the first time I ever heard it was 80 something. And then intermittently. And then consistently for a decade in the 90s into the aughts. And then going to New York and listening to WBAI. And then Amy's show beginning to become what it is. I never went to work for Pacifica. I only volunteered at stations because I didn't want to work for them. I saw them as corrupted by many different problems. So when I went to work there, I knew what I was doing. I said, look, I want to do this for 2 years. I want to be there for the election. I want to have an access to the pool, and I'm going to help you with your analog to digital transition, and I'm going to give you an intellectual spine. That is what I told them. And they were like, awesome. So they hired me, and I did all three of those things. And what ended up happening was this war was generated. And so the volume of resistance we were able to construct, I think, was only because I was in that chair. If I had not been in that chair, what you would hear would be what the military told you. The embedded journalist was invented during this time. The 9/11 events and what Cheney and Bush achieved and Rumsfeld and Ashcroft achieved in terms of tyranny, and then their passage of, the Patriot Acts. I just watched Vice, so it's also quite fresh. Things that I reported on are now being told in movies, in the weirdest way. Anyway, so those three things I did for them, and I ended up becoming their elections coverage guy because nobody there knew how to do elections coverage. So we did that. I covered the Schwarzenegger recall joke, and I covered the big ones. And then Kerry came along, and here was the chance. Here was the network's opportunity to help me help them, not try to help someone win the election, but rather to report fairly on what was happening, which is massive problems across the country with voting. This has been going on since this millennium started. The millennium's a farce. The elections are fixed. You've heard the song I've been singing over and over again. I've come to the point where I'm just writing songs that say, the elections are fixed. The wars are endless. The surveillance is total. I don't think people are grasping the extent to which this has been going on. It's not about Russia and Trump. It's in my lifetime. I'm 52 years old. The America I was raised in is no longer. And this farce of a joke of a thing that we're living in is enraging me day by day. And yes, we should be critical of our government. Yes, we should be critical of our country. I'm so sick of listening to people tell me how great this country is who have never been anywhere. And especially now when it's at its lowest point in my time in this country. What the Bush family did was hijack our country. The Bush family hijacked our country and then enabled the tyranny of certain people. And the Democrats, who were the only force large enough to resist them, they were in that wing of people. I mean, they're within their same range. There's a small number of people who are manipulating the vast majority of Americans into believing this is what it means to be an American. This is what it means to be an American. This is what it means. And they are suppressing dissent actively, and in some cases violently. They're suppressing it as bad or worse as the Soviet Union did in its milder days. And it is about a very complicated set of people that are working together to achieve this. So much so that you have nuts out there trying to identify them. You can't do that. That's not a thing that we can see. We are not given that vision. When you do things like I did, which was I tried for a long time to work my way up, I was ambitious about trying to get access so that I could see how things were operating, intellectually. And people liked me because I think they saw that in me. I wasn't careerist, I wasn't capitalist, but I was intellectual. I wanted things to be, of a quality intellectually. I mean, if I can speak about what I think got me those jobs and why I think people liked me when I was doing what I was doing and why I was doing it. The things that were complicated was that I was then trying to push the thing further, and there were people who were afraid of that and wanted to restrain it. And as an artist, this is where the artistic principles come in. As an artist, there's only so much of that compromising you can do for the ambition of being able to have access to the thing. Because once you have that access, you've got to knock on the door of that access and push it further than the state it's in or the place it's in. Look, I can give you an example. This was an example that Rigo used to love, I remember. I didn't really think much of it, but when it happened, I told the story to Rigo because he called and he said, how's things in New York or whatever? And I go, oh, here's a story you'll like, So this is when Frank Lally was the editor-in-chief of George, and I was in the fact-checking and proofing pool, more fact-checking, and doing a little bit of writing for the website, not much. And one of the first issues, they had a back page, and the back page was a single topic item usually. And in this case, it was Mumia Abu-Jamal. And the headline was in massive letters, and then the piece was about people and where they fall and what their positions were with regard to Mumia Abu-Jamal. And the headline read, "Who wants to free a murderer?" Who wants to free a murderer? Was the headline. Now, George magazine was a fashion political magazine. It was an attempt to help, I think, a certain type of person have access to political thought. But it was much more of a fashion and style thing than it was a hard-hitting magazine. But it had access as a result of the, as you know, who was involved. So we had perhaps 600,000 subscribers across the country, of which, say, 80% voted. So one of the things that the magazine had was a clear voting populace that was reading it for whatever content we were generating. And a responsibility comes with that. And I felt good about being at least, every place I go, I try to add to the spine of the intellectual aspect, So I'm in the thing, I read the page, I take it to the editor, and I say, I don't think you can say this. And he says he's convicted and he's in prison. And I said, yeah, but the only reason we're even talking about him is because that seems to be suspect. And then the editor, who's older than me, wealthier than me, and certainly didn't want to hear from me, some dude down in the fact-checking pool, goes, well, do you want to talk to Frank? And I'd never really had a one-on-one with Frank Lally. But I'm like, yeah, I feel like I do. So it's the end of the day. Now, if you put out a monthly magazine, now the magazine industry is disappearing, but a lot of intellectual things come with publishing in New York at this time that I think, they're just disappearing in a lot of ways. So retaining stories about them, I think, is kind of fun and good. A monthly magazine has the weird thing that in order to be fresh, you have to think 2 months down the road. So you can only be so fresh to the last second. You know what I mean? And a weekly magazine has the benefit of having that much more freshness. So a monthly magazine, I think, is given to feature length and, certain kinds of pieces, evergreens that are contemporary. And the last night at a magazine like that, when you're, I'll never forget, Rob Perry used to say, one of the editors used to say, it's like making an album every month. It's like having a band and you're making an album every month. And he used to use that as his metaphor because he was like mastering, and making it, into a thing that people can consume, which is the last part of it, of the month. That's needs a lot of time. So you've got to get this thing done 2.5 months before it's going to hit the streets. And here it was the last night, and I'm making this editor walk down the hallway to meet Frank Lally to converse about this piece of paper that's going to go out to 600,000 people, and it's going to say, who wants to free a murderer? And the editor and I and Frank are in there. So the editor does his thing. He goes, man, he's been convicted and he's in jail. And not only that, I lived and worked in Philadelphia, and there were many people there who told me that Mumia admitted killing Faulkner. I mean, not on the record, but this is what the guy says to me with the editor-in-chief. So here's the editor-in-chief. Here's the editor who's got the page. Here's the fact-checker, Bozo, who's taking everybody's time at the last second to try to get them to change it. It's my turn now, right? And I look at him and I say, okay, well, if the conviction is wrong, then he's not a murderer. And the only reason we're talking about him is because there seems to be a lot of people who think that, which is why we've given it a page where you're going to discuss people who do and don't think that. And if you and your friends who say that off the record he told you it was that he did it, then what remains is the question of the term murderer, right? Now, if you run at me with a gun and a knife with the intent to kill me, and I resist that and you die, that's self-defense. That's not murder. And they both sat there because neither of them had studied Mumia's case like I have. Neither of them know that all the things that have been coming up since 81 when it went down or whatever. It's a fashion magazine, not really, but it's a political style magazine. All the more reason, So Frank Lally looks at me and he says, so you're saying that Mumia Abu-Jamal could be in prison wrongly because he did kill Faulkner, but it was in self-defense? And I said, that's a possibility. And if that's a possibility, and that's what these people are talking about that we're putting in the magazine, I feel like you're slanting the piece with the headline. And Lally had to admit it. So they changed it. So they changed it to who wants to free a Mumia, which was just like both rhythmic and kind of pop sounding, but also a dumb headline. It was like there was no time. And the word murderer to Mumia was just 4 or 5 letters. So there were several things that I could have done there that were like, one, I could have not done that. It was one of my first weeks to month at the magazine. and just gone later and said, hey, I wasn't really cool with that or something. 2, I had to decide whether I was going to throw it down for Mumia or not. And then if I am, then I got to go the whole distance, right? I mean, I am fact checking this thing. So that happened. That happened. And I had forgotten that. Told Rigo, because Rigo calls from the West Coast. We don't get to talk much at that point. He's flying around the world doing projects. And we're meeting either around the world somewhere. So this is the window where I'm working with Rigo for like 4.5, 5 years. And we're not even in the same city most of the time. And we had agreed like 5 years before that we were going to try to create that. We were going to work together to make that happen, to benefit from it, to function as people living in the aircraft more than people living on the ground for the sake of projects that he could both get and was excited to make. And they were massive in scale. And I was one of maybe 15 guys he was doing this with, and women at that time. So he would call once in a while and he'd ask. And because he's, political and he and I had worked on behalf of political prisoners, in particular Leonard Peltier. I mean, come on. And others, Angola 3 and so on. I told him the story about this changing the word from who wants to free a murderer to who wants to free a Mumia. And then the magazine came out and that's what it said, I wonder if I have that. I have some of those around. I don't think I have that one. So that is an example of what we were talking about yesterday. The idea that, you can have ambition and then you can shelf what you think of as truths. And you can have ambition and get higher and higher up. Or these are extremes on a continuum. They're not like two choices, okay? Or you can have truths and you're less likely to succeed. I mean, materially. And if you do that to the extreme, you end up with truths but isolated. That's the continuum right there. So that happened, and I feared I had. After I did it, I was happy. I didn't really think about it. Told Rigo about it sometime later. And at the time, I didn't have pride in it, like I'm telling you. At the time, I took the car home with my girlfriend, and we were in the car, and I'm like, I'm an idiot. And she was like, no, you did what you think is right, man. You did what you think is right. And I'm like, yeah, but I just blew my wad with these guys over Mumia, like now, What if later there's something that's, super relevant and contemporary, and they look at me as the guy who's constantly trying to, I don't know, whatever, rock the boat, That was my fear at the time. So that was a fear of ambition, you see. And then I forgot about it, moved on. There wasn't really, my job was to fact check. So that was, to me, a fact that was wrong. That was not a fact to me. If we're going to put these people are contesting it, then the question has to be, are you going to side with one side or not, Anyway, so there weren't really things like that, but there were now, as I stayed there longer and I didn't contest much, but did make it nice and sharp as I could, people were like, cool, and for me, I grew more intellectually unsatisfied, but I was learning about that world, I've told the story on the Anticlimactic Non-Show about being there and having a piece that was written by the writer, and I was the fact checker, and we were working together on this thing, get the thing out the way it was supposed to be. And it was actually something that could have given the magazine some political teeth, okay? So it comes to the time, and they're all like, okay, well, here's where we stop in editorial. And I go, what do you mean? He goes, you guys have to go upstairs. And we're like, what? To legal. And we're like, oh, so this is me and him upstairs with legal. So now you have the lawyer You have a representative of the publisher, you have the editor of the piece, you have the writer of the piece, and you have the fact checker. And you're all sitting there, and you have to agree on certain wordings of this piece. So, in order to get what the writer actually wants, and that I'm saying, yes, I checked that fact, that is fact, put it in order for that to be in, legal will say, no fucking way, every time. The publisher has to decide whether his balls are big enough to back either the editor or the writer in any given word or wordings. And the collective decides how the fucking thing goes out the door. Which could not radically, but could definitely and does definitely change the meaning of the piece. Now, all that's gone now. We live in a world where it's not that it's fake news, it's that it's not news. That's, I think, the more appropriate way to put it. And that situation also was disillusioning to me, because I'm like, oh my God, now this piece feels materially different. You know, I was the guy who was arguing over the word murderer in a case with a guy. I mean, it was getting very like, but it paid great. And it was cool to have a kind of influence on that magazine. I felt part of a team, and it was a cool collective. And then it culminated in the craziest night of my life to that point, you know? Now, I'm not going to speak on this more unless any of you who were with me that night, it's been a long time. Sam, but the election night of 2000, which culminated in Bush v. Gore, we were all invited to Frank Lolly's place in Manhattan to watch the results. You know, we had just worked the election, all of us. And a bunch of us in editorial weren't going to go till later. We were just going to hang around because who knows what could happen. And we did have the website. The website was going. Brian Murphy. I'm trying to remember guys from back then. I don't know if any of you guys remember me, but there I was. I'm sure you remember me. I was a bit of a nutcase in that spot. I tried to get the Bush stuff. I went down to Texas on the bill, and I was out of money, and I had to I treated it very much like I did Gonzo for them, and it was okay. It wasn't great. And I fact checked their death penalty piece, which was awesome. And then election night 2000. I've written about it on the website. If you go to the archive, you can see what I wrote about that. But I'm not going to speak about it here because it's just too much detail. I would love it if anybody from then wants to get together and talk about it. That would be great. Because these are memories I haven't had in a long time. So that was a fiasco in Florida that made me way less proud to be an American, way less proud of the United States of America, very angry about the elections process. Everything I'd learned and participated in felt cheated. When behind closed doors, the Supreme Court, which was loaded with his pal, Alioto and company. Sorry, not Alioto. How do you pronounce it? At the moment, the Chief Justice escapes me. But that's how the millennium began. Then came the 2004 election. So then I take all that journalism power and I take it to Pacifica. I gave it to freaking Pacifica, which Pacifica can ruin a person. It's not its own fault. It's what happens when you have that much liberal freedom to, stretch, and it lacks intellectual center. It lacks good editing. It's absurdly petty and political. The egos there are just people that think they know so much, and it's unbelievable how little they know. And then they manufacture things that I think are really insane. So then that just tainted me a lot. I think working for Pacifica probably hurt me more than it helped me. for sure. I don't care because I was trying to give that to Pacifica, but I mean, it definitely hurt me intellectually. It was a step down, but it was a step toward the truths as opposed to toward ambition. So that all happened, I feel. So if anything, this is a what's the word? Cautionary tale? But not really. I think I'm just telling you what happens to you if you don't choose one way. And here I sit, and a lot of times I'm frustrated because I feel bad because after 05, I mean, the second time the fiasco happened is when I really was like, okay, well then forget it, you know? George W. Bush was never the duly elected president of the United States, is my opinion. And his family hijacked our nation, is also my opinion. And I think it's substantiated by good journalism. I don't need to rehash it, but I wish people would believe me because that's to me how I saw it and read it and saw it. So you know, all these three events there, bang, right in my 30s, if you imagine it. I was the age of Jesus when 9/11 happened, and I'm looking at it and I'm going, well, wait a minute now. This reaction we're having, not very Christian. I watched Vice. Oh God, it was painful. I had to stop watching at one point. I just couldn't take it. My wish for the United States to be something that I dreamed it was is so big. My wish for the United States to be something that I dreamed it was is so big. My wish for the United States to be something that I dreamed it was is so big, and it's shit now.